Steph Church, man, I'm so honored to be here this morning, and I wanted to start by telling you guys a little story. Recently, probably a month ago, I was having dinner with my family. It's me, my wife, and we have a 2-year-old. His name is Brooks, and my wife made my favorite homemade meal, and that's chicken Alfredo. And I'm pretty sure you guys make a great chicken Alfredo. I'm sure you guys have been to King's Pizza and had what you thought was the best chicken Alfredo that you've ever had, but my wife's chicken Alfredo is the absolute best. I'm sorry to tell you that, but it just is. She slow cooks and hand makes her pasta sauce. She doesn't have a lick of Italian in her body, but she makes the best chicken Alfredo. So this is a sacred meal for us. And so I'm at the stove making my plate, and I hear a ruckus behind me. And, it's kind of like I hear it, but I'm not really paying attention. Guys, can we talk, right? You know what I'm saying? And so I know something is happening behind me, but I don't know exactly what's going on. And so by the time I make my plate and I get to the table and I sit down, my wife is to my left, and she's got her plate. My son is to my right in his little high chair, and his bowl is next to my wife, and I am under the assumption that she's just letting it cool down. I'm like, that makes sense because it's piping hot. And so I start to eat. My son reaches for my bowl, and I'm like, oh, no, sir. I don't share chicken Alfredo, you know what I'm saying? And so I grab his bowl, assuming that it's cooled off in time, and I go to hand it to him. And my wife says, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And I was like, he's got to eat, doesn't he? And she said, well, he just tried to throw it at me. And so, in my mind, I'm like, yeah, but that was a few minutes ago. He's 2. His brain has gone on to the next thing. So I hand him his bowl of chicken Alfredo, and I kid you not, 20 seconds later, he grabs the bowl by the lip. He pulls it back, sauce, noodles, chicken all over the wall. It's okay. I have 2 small dogs. They cleaned it all up. It was fine. And he throws this bowl of chicken Alfredo at my wife, dude. And I don't know if I was more upset that the Alfredo had been spilled, or if I was mad that he had thrown something at my wife. But I just lost it in that moment. I said, Brooks, we do not throw things at the table. And you guys are like, you're a pastor, you yell? Yeah, bro, I have a short fuse, you know what I'm saying? I don't play when it comes to chicken Alfredo. Here's the deal. Everything calmed down. He ended up eating. He was fine. He's not emotionally scarred or anything like that. But I'm sitting there, and my phone is sitting on the table next to me. I know you shouldn't have phones at the dinner table, but it was there, whatever. I kid you not. I can't make this up, church. 5 minutes later, my phone lights up. I have a text from St. John's Christian Academy that asked me if I could speak at chapel. I love St. John's. I have a good relationship with them. Of course, I'll come speak at chapel. What do you guys want me to speak about? She sends me a text. Y'all, I kid you not. She says, we're on the fruit of the Spirit. Could you please talk about gentleness? And I was like, the Lord's trying to tell me something today. You know what I'm saying? So I get a call from Dustin, and he says, hey, man, love to have you speak at Steph's church. Man, beautiful building, by the way. I love what God has done, the legacy of this building, how he has moved, and what he is doing through and will continue to do in this building through Steph's church is amazing. So I get a call from Dustin, and he says, hey, man, I need you to speak at Steph's church. I don't even ask. I'm like, yeah, absolutely, bro, I'm there. Just tell me when. Put it in my calendar. Closer to the date today, I was like, what do you want me to speak on? And he says, I need you to speak on Sabbath. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting because a few weeks ago, my lead pastor over at the Grove and myself, we do a weekly podcast. And it wasn't but a few weeks ago where I quoted Dustin as being my closest friend who does Sabbath better than anybody else that I know. Like, if you want to know about Sabbath, Dustin is the guy. Like, he's the one to go to. He is the example that I follow. And so I thought either the Lord's trying to teach me something about Sabbath in this moment, or Dustin is trying to punk me. I don't know which it is. So church, today I just want to dive in. I want to answer the question, what is Sabbath? What isn't Sabbath? I know that sounds weird, but just stay with me. Sometimes it sounds better on paper than it does when I say it. And then I want to talk about why that's important for us today in 2026. So to start, let's go to Genesis chapter 2. This is the very beginning of everything. Now, God has been busy creating everything. He created the earth. He created the sky and the sea. He created all the animals and all the vegetation. He created people, and he set our earth into motion to give us a system that would eventually give us the Savior of all time, Jesus. But when he got done creating, Genesis chapter 2, starting in verse 2, says this. By the 7th day, God had finished the work that he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. And then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work and all the creating that he had been doing. Now, you notice a couple repeats there. The creation account is actually a poem, and so it's really beautifully written. But in creation, God created everything, and then he rested. It's really important that I tell you, though, that our word Sabbath comes from a word that you'll see in Scripture, rest, but it is not this word rest. And that's okay. But we have to go back to creation, because from now on, every example of Sabbath and rest that we talk about for the rest of this message will always point back to the rest that God did in the creation narrative. Now, did God have to rest, or did God need to rest? Well, of course he didn't. He's God. He could do whatever he wanted in the time that he wanted to do it. But he chose in that moment to spend one day, whether you believe it was a literal day or an age or 20,000 years, whatever you believe about it, he chose a time period to rest after he was done creating, to commemorate his work, and maybe to set an example for us, because we were created to be creative. Whether you think you are or not, whether you're a musician or an author, or you just work with your hands, or you're a stay-at-home mom, you are a creative being, and you need to rest, because you're at your best when you rest. So, we are created to be creative, and the creative process of life always points us to this idea of a Sabbath. The first thing I'll tell you about Sabbath is that it is a day of rest. Sabbath is a day of rest. And we are at our best when we take time to rest. That's a preacherism if I've ever said one. The next point I want to make comes from Exodus chapter 16, and this won't be on the screen, but let me sum it up for you. The book of Exodus tells the story of God's people, the Israelites, enslaved in Egypt. And this guy named Moses goes to Pharaoh, and he sings the song that we all heard growing up. Pharaoh, Pharaoh, oh baby, let my people go. Y'all never heard that? All right, I'll move on. Hey, not every joke lands, and that's okay. It's a song. Look it up, Steps Church. I can't believe y'all never heard that. All right, so Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. He parts the Red Sea. They're wandering in the desert, and the people start to grumble because they start to get hungry. They start getting hangry. I totally understand. I forgot to eat this morning. Maybe I'm a little hangry myself. They start grumbling like, it would have been better for us to live in Egypt, where we had plenty of food, than to die hungry out here in the wilderness. But God hears his people, and he loves his people, and he provides for his people. And so God tells Moses to tell the people, here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to provide food for you every day of the week for 6 days. And when you wake up in the morning, you go gather as much as you need for that day, and you're going to be cared for. And then the next day, if you gather too much, it's going to be spoiled. But you gather just what you need for you and your family every single day. But on the 6th day, I want you to gather as much as you need and prepare all you need for that day plus the next day. Because on the 7th day, there's not going to be any food. There's not going to be anything. And so this is the first record in Scripture of an obligatory Sabbath. Like God forced them. Like you don't have a choice. Because when you wake up, there's not going to be anything for you to gather. Well, people woke up on the 7th day, and you know what they did? They went to gather, because people are dumb and we don't listen to what God tells us, and they didn't prepare ahead of time. And you know what they found? Nothing, because God told them, I will provide 6 days, provide enough on the 6th day for you to have enough for the 7th day. You just have to rest. Listen to what I'm telling you. You have to rest. And so people went out, they gathered, they found nothing. Exodus 16 refers to it as a day of Sabbath rest. And they were forced to, whether they liked it or not, because there was no food. And so the second thing I would tell you about Sabbath is that it's a day of dependence. Sabbath is a day of dependence on the Lord. Listen, he gives us plenty of time in those 6 days to provide what we need so that we will be sustained when we feel the need to rest. Here's why that is important. Guys, that meeting can be rescheduled for another day. You can respond to that email any day, or that text, or that call. Your kids will never remember how many hours of overtime you worked, but they will remember the time that you sacrificed to be in their lives. And so Sabbath is a day of dependence that the Lord has provided for us enough in the 6 days that we'll be taken care of on the 7th. And then we get to Exodus chapter 20. We'll read this together. I got a little tab right here. Give me just a second. Look at this fancy tab. It's a cut up index card. We get to the 10 Commandments. Now, the 10 Commandments are super important. It's the basis of all morality and ethics for all time. And I know people who are atheists or not Christians would disagree with that, but it all comes back to the 10 Commandments. And even in Christianity, I think sometimes people tend to write off the Old Testament because we have the New Testament. But it's interesting because Jesus said, I came to fulfill the law, not to abolish it. And so in order to understand modern Christianity, it's really important that we don't throw out things like the 10 Commandments. And so let's read it together. So Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, and he comes back with these 2 tablets, basically giving the Israelites instructions on how to be a nation and how to be their own independent people. And this is what he says about Sabbath. Starting in verse 8, he says, "Remember the Sabbath day, keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servants, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and he made it holy." Now, this word holy denotes that there's like this divine presence. When we say we're taking a Sabbath, or we need a Sabbath, or the Lord is commanding us to Sabbath, it's not just a day off to sit in your house with the lights off, binge watching Netflix. Although that sounds awesome, right? That sounds very comforting to me personally. That's not what it is. This is a day that the Lord inhabits. This is a day for us to draw closer to the Lord. He says there's 6 days you can work, and on the 7th day, it's supposed to be set aside for worshiping him and worshiping. But not just you, actually, not just you. See, it's good for you, but also your children, they can't work either. Your servants, they can't work either. Your animals, they can't work either. And it's interesting when you look at the Old Testament, it's easy to wonder, like, why would God include animals in this? Well, it's interesting because, remember, the Israelites are leaving Egypt. They're learning how to be their own independent people. And God is saying, listen, if you work your servants all day, every day, they're going to die, and then who's going to do the work? And if you work your animals all day, every day, guess what? They're going to die, and then who's going to do it? Like, even your animals deserve this time off. Also, he says people who come from foreign lands to your land, they're not allowed to work either. Why is that? Well, it's because the Sabbath is more than just what's happening internally with us. It's a sign that of a covenant between the Israelites and God himself. So that when the other nations, the Babylonians and the Assyrians are taking looks at the Israelites, and they're like, why are you guys different? Why is there one God that's protecting you? Well, what's different about you? Well, we have this day set aside. When the world tells us that we can get more done and be more productive in 7 days than 6, God says that's not true. Come on, somebody. Chick-fil-A. That is Chick-fil-A in a nutshell. Like, people all the time are saying, man, if they were open 7 days a week, if I could get the Lord's chicken on Sunday, they would make so much more money. But they said, you know what? It's not about making more money. It's about a day of rest, and it's about having enough. So the last thing I would tell you about Sabbath, or what Sabbath is it's a day of honor. Sabbath is a day of honor. It's more than just a day of rest and a day of dependence on God. It's a day of honoring him with our work and with our bodies and with our minds by taking that time off. So that's what Sabbath is, a day of rest, a day of dependence, and a day of honor. But what isn't Sabbath? So after the 10 Commandments, we get it, and the Israelites started to become a real people group. Later in the Old Testament, the Assyrians and the Babylonians are going to come in. They're going to capture the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. They're going to haul them off into exile. Eventually, they're going to be able to come back and rehabit the area of Judah, the southern kingdom, around the capital city of Jerusalem. And that's when they start becoming known as Jews. This is when you start to see the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Essenes, and they start arguing. They start coming to like religious power. And they start to take what's an oral tradition. The God's people had taken all of his laws and his rules, and they had started to add on top of them with this oral tradition. Well, people started writing them down, and this is called the Mishnah. You can go and read it still today. And the Mishnah is this written collection of oral traditions, and there are 39 categories of prohibited behavior on the Sabbath. I'll tell you some that you probably expected. You can't plow on the Sabbath. You can't harvest on the Sabbath. You can't plant on the Sabbath, and you can't reap on the Sabbath. And this is why I tell my wife all the time, when I'm trying to take a Sabbath, I cannot cut the grass. Because cutting grass is work for me. So I can't cut the grass. I'll show you why that's important in just a second. But here's some categories that were really interesting to me. You can't carry on the Sabbath. It's not talking about firearms. Please, we're in the South. Protect your family at all times. But you can't carry heavy loads in Sabbath as if like you were walking through the marketplace because it was a sign that you were working. You can't burn on the Sabbath, which means you would have to light your candles before Sabbath began. Also, the next one, you can't extinguish on the Sabbath. And it would have been such a funny joke if I could say, like, if you knocked over your candle and your house caught on fire, too bad, dude. You just got to let it go because you can't extinguish on the Sabbath. But there is a clause. If someone's in danger, your house is on fire, you can put it out, okay? But you can't cook on the Sabbath. This is really interesting to me that this tradition began that you couldn't cook on the Sabbath. Because remember back the first Sabbath that the Lord made his people take, it was like you can't prepare food. You can't prepare food because I've prepared for you enough. So you just need to prepare in advance for the Sabbath. So you need to start the crock pot a day early or whatever it is that you do. And you can't sew on the Sabbath. So if you were to rip your cloak or tunic, you're just out there for everybody to see because you can't fix it on the Sabbath. And so over time from Exodus to Jesus' time, what we got was the Sabbath going from a day of rest, dependence, and honor to God to a burden on the shoulders of God's people. And that's not what it was created to do. Sabbath is not meant to be restrictive. It's meant to be refilling. And we're going to see that throughout what Jesus taught about the Sabbath himself. Because it's so important that we're not throwing out the Old Testament. We're not saying that it's not important or we're not going to follow some of the things in there. But it's important that we look at what Jesus had to say about things like the Sabbath. And so we're going to read real quick in Mark chapter 2. This story also takes place in Matthew 12. If you want to read another account, it's so important. One thing that we're doing at the Grove is our theme of the year is to be a people of the Word, to up our level of biblical literacy, to understand that the Bible is one. Yes, it's 66 different books and poetry and letters all put into one, and we have to make sure we take everything in context. And so just a heads up that if you want to read Matthew's account, it's in chapter 12, but we're going to read Mark's account in chapter 2 because it goes right into chapter 3 for my second point, a little bit of preacher behind the scenes. There you go. So here we go. 23 through 27. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And Jesus answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and he ate the consecrated bread." This is really interesting. I love nerdy stuff like this. In the temple and in the tabernacle before it was a loaf of what they called the showbread. And so David broke in and ate it and gave it to his friends. But Jesus says it was lawful only for the priest to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. And then he said, the Sabbath was made for man, not the man for Sabbath. And so the Son of Man, Jesus, myself, is Lord even of the Sabbath. See, the Sabbath is this day of physical and mental restoration. And so the Pharisees in their brains had equated the hungry disciples picking heads of grain and eating it as if they were harvesting an entire wheat field. And Jesus says, listen, the Sabbath was made for man, not the man for Sabbath. And so the second thing the Sabbath is not the same for everyone. I know sometimes that can be confusing in church terms because we just want black and white. We just want straight answers. But I told you earlier, cutting the grass, man, that is not restful for me, bro. That is not refilling for me. I don't feel like I'm honoring God and cutting my grass because I'm listening to music that probably shouldn't be playing in church, you know what I'm saying? But my grandmother, y'all, she loved jumping on that riding lawnmower and just scooting along for hours at a time. She loved gardening. And when she got done, she could sit back and look at the work she had done and be proud of it. And so for my grandmother, and maybe for you, yard work might be Sabbath. It might be rest. But for TJ, boy, it's not. I hope my wife's watching. She's not. But if she was, I'm going to tell her to go back and watch it. So the Sabbath is not the same for everyone. Remember, the Sabbath was made for you, not you for the Sabbath. You're not called to be a slave to strict rules and regulations. The Sabbath was made for you to get a chance to rest because God knows that we're dumb and we'll fill our time with so much stuff that we forget to rest. And I'll be honest, thank you, Lord, for building in this built-in need to rest because I noticed that when I just think I can go, He shuts my body down and gives me a cold. God doesn't really sit up there and be like, it's time to make TJ sick. I don't think God's doing that. I think that's just our bodies. But then Jesus says, the Son of Man is Lord, and I'm Lord even of the Sabbath. What does that mean? I think it means that the Sabbath is not greater than the gospel. The Sabbath is not greater than the gospel. What do I mean by that? Check this out. So this is why I chose Mark, because when the scriptures were originally written, you wouldn't have had chapters and verses the way in which we do. And I think it kind of does a disservice to go from chapter 2 to chapter 3. This should have been one continuous story. And the original readers would have read this as one continuous story, because after Jesus says that, chapter 3, verse 1 says, "Another time Jesus went to the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. And so Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, 'Stand up in front of everyone.' And so Jesus asked him, 'Which is more lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?' But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. And he said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' And so he stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. And then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus." Now, the Herodians were a group of they were Jews, but they were Roman sympathizers. You know, we read about the Israelites and how they hated Roman oppression. There was a small group that were for it. And the Pharisees in that moment were like, let's get with these guys who are already sympathizing with Rome. How can we kill this guy, Jesus? It was the Sabbath. He says, what can I or can't I do on the Sabbath? Well, the truth is the Sabbath is not greater than the gospel. So what we don't get to do is say, I can't volunteer at church because it's my Sabbath, or I can't give that homeless person $5 because it's my Sabbath, or I can't volunteer at a food bank because it's my Sabbath, because the Sabbath is not greater than the gospel. It's illustrated in this story by Jesus is asking them, hey, tell me, what's more important on a day of rest, this day of rest that God has given us, that we give someone life or death? And it's so funny because Jesus gives this man a whole new lease on life while the Pharisees are plotting death. So you tell me, who was really observing and respecting the Sabbath, Jesus or the Pharisees? And the answer is obviously Jesus. So the list of what I can or can't do on the Sabbath for us today is really whatever does not take the place of doing gospel work, because pointing other people to Jesus is the most important thing. So why is this important for us? Well, I think it's important for us today to talk about Sabbath because we think in our culture that busyness equals success. I'm the same way. I used to think, man, if I could just have my whole schedule be filled with speaking engagements, if I could just have meetings on top of meetings, I would feel so official and so legit. We think that busy equals successful, but can I be honest with you? You might think you thrive on busy, but you don't. You might feel like you're healthy when you're always busy, but the people around you, your family, your team, your coworkers, they're the ones who will suffer when you fill your schedule to the brim and think that you're thriving. I said it earlier, man, you might think you're successful when you're busy, but man, you'll never get that time back with your kids or your spouse or your family or your church family. Our bodies, our minds, and our souls, they all need rest. And so God built in this day, built in this time for us to remember him, to respect him, to revere him, to honor him, but also for our minds, our hearts, and our bodies to rest so that we can be at our best. Now, you probably, like most pastors, want me to give you some practical ways to observe the Sabbath. The truth is, I can't. Because I could stand up here and I could say, you should carve out one day a week, this the Lord's, and stick to it. Or you should carve out one day a month, or maybe it's 1 week a year. But the truth is, the Sabbath was made for us, not us for the Sabbath. So really, the practical advice that I can give you is that you have to prioritize it. I can't do it for you. And that's the point. Sabbath is an intentional time, an intentional holy time that we have set aside and apart for rest, dependence, and honor. And the truth is, in our culture, it's not practical, but it's imperative. It's not practical to say, peace out, I'm taking a day, don't call me because you're not going to get me. But it's imperative for our souls that we make time to rest. So what? What do we do with this? I got 5 minutes and 15 seconds to tell you guys why this matters. Why does any of this matter? Why should I, TJ, I get it, but I got a car payment due. I got to work this extra time. I get it, TJ, but, my kid has another year of baseball. I can miss his games. You know what I'm saying? Why does this matter? In Matthew, I don't have a cute little thing, so I have to flip old school style. In Matthew chapter 11, we get this thing that Jesus said. Now, it would be naive of me to assume that everyone in this room is a Christian. Or maybe you're new to the faith and you're trying to figure out. Maybe you showed up this morning and you're like, how can I connect to Jesus through this idea of Sabbath? In Matthew 11, Jesus says this. He's talking about how he's come from the Father. He's the Messiah. You got to pay attention. Why is this important, man? In a world and in a culture that tells us that we have to fill our minds and our time with so much stuff that doesn't matter, this is what Jesus says. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. That's somebody in here today. Somebody didn't think they were coming to church this morning. You rolled out of bed and you were like, you know what? I just need to sleep in. I just need a day off. I just need time to unwind from this life that is always telling me I'm not enough and I have to work harder. That's somebody in here this morning needed to hear Jesus say, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest in your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Here it is again, Jesus telling us the importance of getting rest, of unloading our burdens to him. He says, my yoke is easy. Now, a yoke he was referencing a device that they would put on animals so that they could steer them where they needed to go, so that they could be more efficient in the field. Jesus isn't saying he wants to work us like an animal. When he's saying his yoke, that's just submission to him, agreeing that, yes, Jesus has a better way for my life. Taking a day of rest is better than me filling my time with things that I think will bring me success or joy. His yoke, taking on Jesus' yoke, which he says is easy, is following him. And I'm telling you, life doesn't get perfect and it doesn't get simple. Life is just complex and hard. But when we do it under the submission of our Lord Jesus, it just makes a little bit more sense. And we have this supernatural peace that doesn't make sense. His burden, right? No one wants to, I can't handle any more burdens. Jesus isn't saying he's going to make life harder for you. He's just saying, like, follow my commands. Believe it or not, I was there at creation. I know you better than you know yourself. And ask anyone who decided to follow Jesus in the tough times of their lives and ask them if they regret it. He's saying, listen, just come to me. If you're burdened, if you're weary, I will give you the rest that your body and soul so eagerly desires. And so I'm just saying, Steps Church, that if you've been trying to figure out this life on your own and you've been fighting this uphill battle, I'm just here to tell you today that maybe what you need is rest, and that rest will only come through a life-changing relationship with Jesus and walking behind him and letting him lead your thoughts, letting him lead your schedule. Do you really want to find rest in a life that says otherwise, that you should just fill your time with all this nonsense? Do you really want to find life or rest in this life so that you can be at your best? I'm going to tell you 2 ways to do that. Number 1 is that relationship with Jesus. And number 2 is a faith community like right here at Steps Church, where you can get plugged in, where you have plenty of opportunities to serve alongside people who are struggling with the same things that you're struggling with. If you really want to find rest, give your life to Jesus and commit to a faith community. So Sabbath, it's not something that we talk about a lot in 2026 because we just want to go all the time. I get it. But Sabbath is a day of rest, a day of dependence, and a day of honor for the Lord. And if we're going to take our faith seriously, it has to be something that we prioritize, because it's not practical, but it's imperative. Let me pray for you. God, thank you so much for this message of Sabbath. Felt like I was just preaching to myself the whole time. God, your words are so clear about the importance of taking time to rest my body and my mind and my spirit and my soul. And yet, for some reason, like the ancient Israelites, I still think that I have to pack my schedule. God, but you tell me otherwise. You tell me that I'm at my best when I take time to rest. So I thank you for a church like Steps Church and the leadership of Pastor Dustin, who says, you know what, we're going to take an entire Sunday off to rest. God, I pray for our culture that we would recognize the value in taking a day, maybe an hour, maybe a week, just set aside so that we could do nothing but spend that time being dependent on you, recharging our batteries, and falling more and more in love with you. And God, I thank you for Jesus. I thank you that when life gets crazy and hard and difficult, I thank you that when things happen that just doesn't make sense to me, Lord, I know that you're Lord of all things, including the Sabbath. And what you did on that cross so long ago, I can find rest in any situation thanks to that. God, we love you so much. Amen.